pilot, and he had someone there, called himself an airport bum. He was a young kid, about 17 years old. His name was Bob Starr, and he wanted to go along, and so they asked my permission. I said, that's fine. So we got in the plane, took off. An hour and a half later, the plane had ice on the wings, and you couldn't see out of the front window very well because of the snow and the freezing ice. So I could see that the mountains were on the left because I was low and the mountains were up higher. So I could barely see out of the front of the airplane or through the side of the airplane. I can see this mountain coming up towards us. And I realized that we were going to crash. And so the pilot tried to stall the plane, crashed into the top of the trees. Trees came into the cockpit, and of course that's what killed the pilot. But I think it was fortunate enough that I was in the back seat, and the pilot did try to stall the plane, and then sheared off a part of a tree that slowed it down, and came in at this angle. And the ironic thing about that is if it had come in any other way, the plane probably would have hit a tree and just shattered at that point. Next thing I knew, I was trying to get out of that airplane, which I did because the door was up above me. And here I am in the middle of the snow, coughing up a lot of blood. Raised my head, looked around, and I just saw parts of airplane and a lot of snow. And I thought at that point that I was going to not make it. Trying to survive, somehow or another the boy came out of the front of the airplane. He threw a stretcher out to me. I rolled over onto the stretcher. And then more time passed, he went back into the plane, came back out and said, Gene, you better get back into the plane. So he helped me back into the plane. And of course the airplane was at an angle where you couldn't lie down, you couldn't sit down. It was a very difficult place to be in. The realization came to me that I wasn't going to die right then. And I noticed that he had some injuries and I had some injuries, and that started our ordeal. And so we just tried to organize ourselves in a position. I was lying down and I couldn't move once I got into the plane. Of course, at that time of year, it gets dark within 3 or 4 hours, and it starts to get cold around 3 o'clock in the afternoons. We stuffed parts of the plane in our arms, around our body. I got the pilot's jacket, tore the sleeves off, put the sleeves into my legs into the sleeves, and I wore an old pair of dirty shorts over my head to protect my nose and my ears. And the third day, I took my shoes off and had the boy, well, I couldn't pull them off myself, but I asked him to do that. So my feet were turning black from the frostbite. And so from then on, I left my shoes off, and I had him get me a piece of polyfoam out of the seats, wrap the polyfoam around my feet, put the socks over my feet, which probably saved me from losing my feet. You think about food after a while, but thirst was worse than the food. Those are the difficult things to deal with. It did rain. And of course there was a hole in top of the plane, and there were some maps on the plane, and we made a cone out of those maps to form the maps so that the water would come down through a funnel and into the bags. And of course by the time, this was probably around the 5th or 6th or 7th day after being dehydrated from lack of water, so we drank ice water all night long. It snowed every day until the 11th day. And the 11th day, we tried to walk out of that area. We made some snowshoes, but they wouldn't work. And the snow was not fully packed, so we would walk into each other's footsteps. And we walked downhill rather than uphill, trying to find a clearing. And that didn't work. So we came back to the airplane around 3 o'clock because it became very cold. And that was a very bad day for both of us because we were out of energy. The 14th day, the boy left the plane, and I had asked him to come back before it got cold. He didn't come back. He apparently slept in the log that night. It wasn't that cold that evening. So that next day, I got out of the plane, and I had a pad with me, either a part of the seat. And I walked down to a clearing. I took off all my clothes, and I laid there in the middle of the snow and looked up at the sky. It was beautiful. And there was a large jet coming across the sky with a vapor trail. And I thought, well, this may be my good last day. So I was going to enjoy that. So it got cold again. I looked at my body, and it had changed quite a bit. I lost quite a bit of weight, about 36 pounds. So I made my way back to the airplane, and the very next day, I heard a noise. And it was a helicopter coming up the side of the hill, crisscrossing the hill. And the helicopter came right over the top of me. And I was standing up in the airplane looking at this helicopter, and the helicopter disappeared. So for the first time, I thought there was a possibility that I would get out of there. And then it disappeared. And so I went from a very high feeling to an extremely low feeling. Because I remember standing up in that airplane, and I had my head bowed down, and I thought, boy, if they didn't see me then, they would never see me. Well, the ironic thing about it was they did see me, and they needed to find a place to land. And then, I don't exactly know how much time went by, but I heard a noise, somebody was talking. I talked back, trying to locate each other. And then, finally, over the hill comes this guy with a safari hat and a red beard. And I hugged that guy, and I thought, boy, I'm going to get out of here. It was wonderful. It was the greatest feeling I've ever had in my whole life.